The bullet had torn clean through Samuel Quinn's shoulder, and he barely made it to the little cabin on the outskirts of Circleville, Utah, before collapsing against the wooden door with a sound that brought Nurse Nora Adams rushing from her medical supplies cabinet. She caught him before he hit the ground, though he outweighed her by a good 70 pounds of lean muscle and trail dust. His hat tumbled off, revealing dark hair matted with sweat, and his gray eyes struggled to focus on her face as she dragged him inside with strength born of necessity rather than size. The year was 1878, and out here on the Utah frontier, a woman learned quickly how to handle emergencies alone or watch people die. Gunshot, he managed through gritted teeth, his hand pressed against his left shoulder where blood seeped between his fingers, staining his tan shirt a deep crimson. "I can see that," Nora said, her voice steady despite the way her heart hammered. She had been a frontier nurse for 3 years now, ever since she turned 20 and decided that Boston society held nothing for her but suffocating parlors and men who wanted decorative wives. Out here, she saved lives. "Can you make it to the examination table?" he nodded, stumbling forward with her support. He was tall, well over 6 feet, and moved with the controlled grace of someone used to physical labor despite his injury. When they reached the sturdy wooden table she used for treating patients, he hauled himself up with his good arm, jaw clenched against the obvious pain. "Who shot you?" she asked, already cutting away his shirt with practiced efficiency. The cabin was warm from the wood stove, and afternoon light streamed through the windows she kept scrupulously clean. Everything in her clinic had its place, from the surgical instruments boiled and waiting in clean cloth to the medicinal herbs hanging to dry from the ceiling beams. "Does it matter?" His voice held a trace of dark humor. "Disagreement over cards. Other fellow thought I was cheating. I was not." "Was he a good shot?" She examined the wound carefully. The bullet had gone through the fleshy part of his shoulder, missing the bone and major blood vessels by what looked like sheer luck. It was bleeding steadily but not spurting, which meant she could handle this without calling for the doctor from the next town over. "Obviously not, or I would be dead rather than bleeding on your table." Despite the situation, Nora found herself appreciating his calm demeanor. Many men twice his age would be crying or cursing by now. She guessed him to be around 25, with the weathered skin of someone who spent his life outdoors but without the deep creases that came with another decade of sun and wind. "This is going to hurt," she warned him, reaching for the carbolic acid solution she used to clean wounds. "Doctor." Lister's theories on antisepsis were still considered radical by many, but Nora had seen too many men die of infection to ignore the evidence. "Everything hurts right now, madam. Cannot imagine it getting much worse." He was wrong about that. When she poured the solution through both sides of the wound, flushing out dirt and powder burns, he went rigid and the color drained from his face. But he did not cry out, merely gripped the edge of the table until his knuckles went white. "You're tougher than most," she observed, using clean gauze to pat the area dry. The bleeding had slowed already, which was a good sign. "My mother raised me not to scream in front of ladies. I'm a nurse. I've heard every sound the human body can make. Nevertheless." He managed a weak smile. "Samuel Quinn, by the way. Since I'm bleeding all over your clinic, figured you should know my name. Nora Adams. And you're not bleeding all over it, I have cloths down." She threaded a curved needle with silk thread, holding it up so he could see. "The bullet went clean through, which is fortunate, but I need to stitch both the entry and exit wounds. Do you want whiskey first? Do you have any? I keep some for medical purposes. Then I will trust your judgment on whether I need it." She considered him for a moment. His face was pale but composed, his breathing controlled despite what had to be considerable pain. "I think you can manage without. The alcohol would be better used on the outside of you than the inside in any case." The stitching took concentration. Nora had steady hands and a good eye for the tiny, even stitches that would minimize scarring. Samuel watched her work for the first few moments, then turned his head to stare at the ceiling, jaw working but no sound emerging. She counted 17 stitches in the back where the bullet had exited, then had him lean forward slightly so she could address the entry wound. 13 there. Finished, she announced, tying off the final stitch. I'll bandage it now, and you'll need to keep it clean and dry for at least a week. The stitches should come out in 10 days if it's healing properly. 10 days. He said it quietly, as if considering the implications. Yes, and you should not be riding or doing any kind of strenuous work during that time. The wound could reopen, or worse, you could develop an infection. Where exactly am I supposed to stay for 10 days? I passed maybe 3 buildings on my way into this town. Nora had been expecting this question. Circleville was small even by frontier standards, a collection of perhaps 40 souls scattered across ranches and farms, with a handful of buildings clustered where the main road crossed the creek. There was no hotel, no boarding house, barely even a proper saloon. The Johnsons sometimes take in travelers, she said, wrapping clean bandages around his shoulder with efficient movements. Their ranch is about 2 miles north. I have no money to pay them. He said it matter-of-factly without shame. Lost it in the card game before the shooting started. This complicated matters. The Johnsons were good people, but they struggled like everyone else out here. They could not afford to take in a stranger for 10 days out of pure charity. There's a small room in the back of the clinic, Nora heard herself say, even though she had not consciously made the decision. It's where I sleep when I have a patient who needs watching through the night. You could stay there, at least until you're well enough to travel. Samuel's gray eyes met hers, and she saw surprise there along with something that might have been relief. That's generous of you, Miss Adams, but I wouldn't want to impose. It's practical, she corrected. If you try to travel too soon and the wound reopens, you might bleed out before finding help. If you develop a fever from infection, you will need medical care. Better you stay here where I can monitor your recovery. When you put it that way, seems foolish to refuse. He attempted to sit up straighter and winced. Though I should mention I'm not entirely sure that fellow who shot me won't come looking to finish the job. Nora paused in the act of securing the bandage with a knot. You think he's tracking you? No. He was drunk and angry, but I put considerable distance between us before I started losing blood. Just wanted you to know the situation, in case you're reconsidering your offer. I'm not. She finished with the bandage and stepped back to examine her work. But you can tell me the full story once you've rested. You've lost a fair amount of blood, and your body needs time to recover. The back room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a chair. Nora kept spare blankets there, and the window faced east to catch the morning sun. She helped Samuel back to the bed, noting how his steps had grown unsteady. The shock and blood loss were catching up with him now that the immediate emergency had passed. When did you last eat? She asked as he sank onto the bed with poorly concealed relief. Yesterday morning, I think. Lost track of time on the trail. I'll bring you some broth. Your stomach probably could not handle anything heavier right now anyway. She left him there and returned to the main room of the clinic, where she stoked the fire and set a pot of beef broth to warm. Her hands moved through the familiar tasks, while her mind turned over this unexpected development. She lived alone in this clinic, had done so for 3 years without incident. The arrangement was unusual enough that it had caused considerable talk when she first arrived in Circleville. A young woman from back east with nursing training and the unshakable determination to practice her profession on the frontier. The local families had been skeptical at first, but Nora had won them over one patient at a time. She had delivered babies, set broken bones, treated fevers and infections and injuries of every description. She kept her clinic spotlessly clean, her manner professional and her personal life private. The townspeople respected her now, though she knew they still whispered sometimes about the unmarried nurse living alone. Taking in a strange man, even an injured one, would start those whispers all over again. But what choice did she have? She could not in good conscience send him away when he had no money and no safe place to recover. That would violate everything she believed about her calling as a nurse. When the broth was warm, she ladled some into a bowl and carried it back to the small room. Samuel had managed to remove his boots but otherwise lay as she had left him, staring at the ceiling with an expression she could not quite read. "Can you sit up to eat?" she asked. He did, though she could see the effort it cost him. She handed him the bowl and a spoon, and he ate slowly, methodically, like a man who had gone hungry before and knew not to waste food. "This is good," he said after several spoonfuls. "Thank you. It's just broth. It's warm food given freely. That makes it good." He took another spoonful. "How did you end up out here, Miss Adams? You sound educated." "Eastern, Boston," she confirmed. "And I came out here because there was work that needed doing. The frontier has plenty of cowboys and prospectors and ranchers, but not nearly enough medical care. Noble calling. Practical one. I'm good at it, and it pays better than being a governess or a shop girl." She did not mention the other reasons, the suffocating expectations and the marriage proposals from men who wanted a wife to show off at dinner parties. "What about you, Mr. Quinn? How does a man end up shot over a card game in Circleville, Utah?" "Drifting," he said simply. "Been working ranches since I was 16, moving when the work runs out or when I get restless. Was heading south, thought I might try my luck in Arizona. Stopped here because my horse needed rest and I was hungry." "And you gamble?" "Only when I'm bored. I'm actually quite good at cards, which is why that fellow got so angry. Could not believe I was beating him fair and square." He finished the broth and set the bowl aside. "I truly was not cheating. I believe you." And oddly, she did. There was something straightforward about Samuel Quinn despite the rough edges. "Get some rest now. I'll check on you in a few hours." She left him there and spent the remainder of the afternoon organizing her supplies and updating her patient notes. She had 3 other patients she was monitoring: old Mrs. Henderson with her rheumatism, young Tommy Wright recovering from a broken arm, and Mr. Chen at the general store who was managing his diabetes with careful diet. And the insulin treatments Nora prepared from animal pancreases, using techniques she had learned from medical journals. When she checked on Samuel again as the sun was setting, she found him deeply asleep, his breathing even and his color better than before. The bandages showed no fresh blood, which was encouraging. She touched his forehead briefly, checking for fever, and found his skin warm but not worryingly so. He did not stir at her touch, lost in the exhausted sleep of an injured body working to heal itself. Nora made herself a simple dinner of cornbread and beans, then settled into her rocking chair with a medical journal that had arrived on last week's supply wagon. But she found her attention wandering to the closed door of the back room, wondering about the man sleeping there. Samuel Quinn, 25 or thereabouts, drifting cowboy, good at cards, shot over a dispute he had not started. Tough enough to ride several miles with a bullet hole through his shoulder. Polite enough to thank her for simple broth. Honest enough to warn her he might bring trouble. She shook her head at her own thoughts. He was a patient, nothing more. In 10 days he would be healed enough to travel, and he would drift on to wherever drifting cowboys went. She would likely never see him again. That was how it should be. Yet as she finally banked the fire and prepared for bed in the main room where she had set up her own sleeping area for the duration of his stay, Nora found herself hoping those 10 days would pass without complication. not just for his sake, but because there was something intriguing about Samuel Quinn that she wanted to understand better. She fell asleep to the sound of crickets outside and the faint crackle of the dying fire, unaware that 10 days would turn into something much longer, and that the cowboy sleeping in her back room would change the course of her carefully ordered life in ways she could not yet imagine. Morning came with golden light streaming through the eastern windows. Nora woke early from habit, dressed quickly behind a privacy screen she had set up, and went to check on her patient before starting the day's work. She found Samuel already awake, sitting on the edge of the bed and looking frustrated with his right hand pressed against his bandaged shoulder. "How is the pain?" she asked from the doorway. "Manageable, but I need to, well." He gestured vaguely toward the window. "Is there an outhouse?" Around the back, 30 paces straight out from the rear door. She evaluated him with a professional eye. "Can you make it there on your own? I'm shot, not crippled. You lost a significant amount of blood yesterday. If you push yourself too hard too fast, you could faint." "I will be careful." She stepped aside to let him pass, noting that his steps were steadier than yesterday evening but still slower than they should be. She waited in the clinic's main room, listening for any sounds of distress from outside. When he returned several minutes later, he was pale and slightly breathless but upright. "See," he said. "Managed fine. Sit down before you fall down." She pointed to one of the chairs near the examination table. "I need to check your bandages anyway." He complied, lowering himself into the chair with visible relief. Nora untied the bandages and examined the stitches carefully. The entry wound looked clean, no signs of infection, minimal swelling. The exit wound was slightly more inflamed, but that was normal given the tissue damage. "Healing well so far," she announced, "but you need to take it easy today. Rest, eat, let your body do the work. I'm not used to sitting idle, then you will have to learn." She began rewrapping the bandages with fresh cloth. "Consider it part of the treatment." "You're a stern nurse, Miss Adams. I'm an effective one. There's a difference." She tied off the bandage. "I'll make breakfast. Can you stomach eggs and toast?" I could stomach just about anything that's not moving. The morning passed quietly. Nora made breakfast for both of them, scrambled eggs and toasted bread with butter and jam from her small store of supplies. Samuel ate with the same methodical attention he had given the broth, cleaning his plate completely. "When did you last have a proper meal?" she asked, watching him. "Been a few days. The ranch where I was working ran into money troubles, had to let most of us go. I was making my way to the next town when I decided to stop here." He set down his fork. "That's when the card game happened. What kind of ranch work do you do?" "Whatever needs doing. I can break horses, mend fences, work cattle. Been doing it since I left home at 16. "Where's home?" "Wyoming Territory. Little place called Buffalo. My father had a small ranch there, but after he died, my mother sold it and moved back east to live with her sister. I decided to stay out here." "You did not want to go back east." "No, madam. This is where I belong. Open spaces, hard work, knowing what you have is what you earned." He looked at her thoughtfully. "Though I suppose you gave up the east to come out here, so you must understand that feeling." She did, though she had never articulated it quite that way. "The East is fine for people who fit there. I did not. Neither did I." It was a moment of unexpected connection, and Nora felt herself warming to this stranger in a way that went beyond the professional concern of a nurse for her patient. She cleared the dishes quickly, unsettled by her own reaction. "I have other patients to see today," she told him. "You should stay here and rest. There are books on the shelf if you want something to read." "I can read," he said, and she heard the slight defensiveness in his tone. "I did not assume you could not. I'm simply offering entertainment to pass the time." His expression softened. "Sorry. I'm not used to people expecting much from drifting cowboys." "Then perhaps you should stop drifting and become something else." She did not know why she said it, and from the surprise on his face, Samuel did not know either. She left before he could respond, gathering her medical bag and setting out to make her rounds. Mrs. Henderson was feeling better. The liniment Nora had prepared helping with her joint pain. Tommy Wright's arm was healing perfectly, the boy already chafing at the restrictions that came with a splint. Mr. Chen's sugar levels were stable, his careful adherence to diet and treatment keeping the worst of his condition at bay. It was late afternoon when Nora returned to the clinic, arms full of fresh vegetables from Mrs. Henderson's garden, payment for the medical care. She found Samuel in the rocking chair by the window, one of her medical journals open on his lap. "Find something interesting?" she asked, setting the vegetables on her work table. "Article about new techniques for treating gangrene. Fascinating stuff, though some of the descriptions are not for the faint of heart. You read medical journals for entertainment. You said there were books on the shelf." Did not specify what kind. He closed the journal carefully. "Besides, I figure if I'm going to be here for 10 days, might as well learn something useful. Can you understand it? The terminology can be complex, mostly. Context helps with the words I do not know." He set the journal aside. "I'm not educated formal-like, but I taught myself to read well enough. Books are good company on long trail rides." Nora found herself revising her assumptions about Samuel Quinn yet again. He was not just a drifting cowboy with a talent for cards. There was intelligence there, curiosity, a mind that wanted to learn despite the lack of formal education. "I'm making vegetable soup for dinner," she said. "Are you hungry, always?" She set about preparing the meal, aware of his eyes on her as she worked. It should have made her uncomfortable, having a man watching her in the domestic space of her clinic. Instead, she found it oddly companionable, like having a friend visit rather than a patient to manage. "Tell me about nursing," he said after a while. "How did you learn?" "My mother was interested in medical care, though of course she could not pursue it professionally. She taught me what she knew, and when I was 18, I convinced a local doctor to let me train under him. I worked as his assistant for 2 years, learning everything he would teach me." She began chopping carrots with practiced efficiency. "When I heard about the need for medical care in the frontier territories, I knew that was what I wanted to do." "Your family approved?" "No. They thought I was throwing my life away, that I would end up alone and poor in some God-forsaken wilderness." She smiled without humor. "They may have been right about the alone part, but I'm not poor and this is not God-forsaken, just different. Do you miss them, sometimes?" "Mostly I miss my mother. We write letters, though it takes weeks for them to reach each other." She added the carrots to the pot. "What about you? Do you miss your family?" "My mother, yes. We write occasionally, but she has a new life now." Does not need me complicating it with stories of bar fights and bullet wounds. "Are bar fights and bullet wounds common occurrences for you?" "No, though I suppose one time is enough to establish a pattern." He shifted in the chair, wincing slightly. "Truth is, most days are just work and sleep and moving on. Not much excitement, but not much trouble either. Sounds lonely." "It is. But I never found a place that felt like home enough to make me want to stay." The soup simmered as the sun set, filling the clinic with rich smells. Nora set the table for two, lighting an oil lamp against the gathering darkness. They ate together in comfortable silence, and afterward, Samuel insisted on helping clear the dishes despite his injury. "I can manage," Nora protested. "So can I." "You're letting me stay here for free. Least I can do is help with the cleaning." They stood side by side at the wash basin, Nora washing while Samuel dried with his good hand. It felt strangely intimate, this simple domestic task, and Nora was acutely aware of his presence beside her. He was tall enough that she had to look up to meet his eyes, and there was something steady about him that she found appealing. "Miss Adams," he said quietly, "I want you to know I appreciate what you are doing for me, Most people would not take in a stranger the way you have. I'm a nurse. It's my calling. Maybe, but you are also kind, and that is not the same thing as professional duty. She did not know how to respond to that, so she focused on the dishes until they were finished. Then she checked his bandages one more time, confirmed that he still had no fever, and sent him to bed with instructions to call out if he needed anything during the night. She lay awake in her makeshift bed in the main room, listening to the sounds of the night. An owl called from somewhere nearby. The wind moved through the sagebrush, and from the back room came the quiet sound of Samuel's breathing, steady and even in sleep. 3 days passed in similar fashion. Samuel grew stronger each day, the healthy color returning to his face. He continued to help around the clinic when Nora would let him, washing dishes, sweeping floors, organizing supplies under her direction. He read her medical journals and asked intelligent questions about treatments and techniques. And they talked, long conversations over meals and in the evenings, about everything and nothing. Nora learned that Samuel had a dry sense of humor and a thoughtful way of looking at the world. He learned that she played piano when she could find one, that she missed the ocean from her childhood summers on the Massachusetts coast, and that she had a weakness for peppermint candy, which she ordered specially from a supplier in Salt Lake City. On the 4th day, a rider came looking for medical help. A man at one of the outlying ranches had been kicked by a horse and needed attention. Nora gathered her supplies quickly. "How long will you be gone?" Samuel asked. "Hard to say. Depends on the severity of the injury. Could be a few hours, could be longer. Will you be safe?" The concern in his voice surprised her. "I've made this kind of trip dozens of times. The Petersons are good people. Still, it's a long ride for a woman alone. This is my job, Mr. Quinn. I cannot only treat patients who happen to be close by." "I know, just be careful." She promised she would, oddly touched by his worry. The ride to the Peterson ranch took an hour over rough terrain. The injured man, Jack Peterson's eldest son, had indeed been kicked by a horse, resulting in 2 broken ribs and significant bruising. Nora bound his ribs, gave him laudanum for the pain, and instructed the family on care and warning signs of internal bleeding. It was dark by the time she returned to the clinic. She found Samuel pacing the main room, his face tight with concern that eased immediately when she walked through the door. "You're back," he said, and the relief in his voice was unmistakable. "I told you I would be. It's full dark. I was worried something happened. The injury was more serious than I expected. It took time to treat properly." She set down her medical bag, suddenly exhausted. "But I'm back now and I'm fine." "Have you eaten?" "No, sit down, I made stew." At her surprised look, he added, "You had everything ready in the pot. I just had to keep the fire going and stir occasionally. Figured you would be hungry when you got back." It was such a simple thing, but it had been years since anyone had thought to care for her that way. Nora sat, too tired to protest, and let Samuel serve her a bowl of stew that was actually quite good. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You have been taking care of me for 4 days. About time I returned the favor." She looked at him across the table, at his gray eyes watching her with genuine concern, and felt something shift in her chest. This was dangerous territory. She could not afford to develop feelings for a patient, especially one who would be leaving in less than a week. But as they ate together in the lamplight, talking about his day and hers, Nora found it increasingly difficult to remember why she needed to maintain that distance. The 5th day brought rain, a rare event in the dry Utah territory. Nora woke to the sound of drops pattering on the roof and smiled before she was fully conscious. She loved rain, the way it softened everything and brought the smell of sage rising from the earth. Samuel was already awake when she checked on him, standing at the window and watching the rain fall. "Morning," she said. "How did you sleep?" "Well, The shoulder barely bothers me now. He turned from the window. This rain, will it last? Probably not. Summer storms blow through quick out here. Shame, it's peaceful. They ate breakfast together, then Nora examined his wounds carefully. The healing was progressing exactly as it should, the stitches holding well, no sign of infection or complication. "You're recovering faster than most would," she told him. "Is that good or bad?" "Good for your health. It means you're strong and your body knows how to heal itself." "When do you think I can travel?" The question hung in the air between them. They both knew what he was really asking. How much longer until he had to leave? "The stitches should come out in 5 more days," Nora said carefully. "After that, you'll need to take it easy for another week or so, but you could travel if you needed to." "If I needed to," he repeated. "What if I did not need to?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if I wanted to stay longer, find work around here maybe?" Nora's heart began to beat faster. "There's not much work in Circleville. Most of the ranches have all the hands they need." "What about here?" "Here, the clinic. You said yourself you have to travel long distances to see patients. What if you had someone to help? Someone to keep the place running while you're away, help with the heavy work, maybe learn enough to assist with basic care. You want to work for me, if you would have me." He met her eyes directly. "I know it's unusual, but these past 5 days being here helping you, it's the most useful I have felt in years, and I—" He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I like it here, like the work, the learning, like being around you." The admission hung between them, honest and vulnerable. Nora should say no. It was improper, a single woman and a single man living and working in close quarters. The town would talk. But when she opened her mouth to refuse, what came out instead was, "I could not pay you much." Hope flared in his eyes. "I do not need much. Room and board would be enough, at least to start. The townspeople will gossip. Let them. We would know the truth of it." "And what is the truth of it, Mr. Quinn?" He took a step closer, his good hand reaching out to gently touch her arm. "The truth is that I think you are the most remarkable woman I have ever met. The truth is that I want to stay here and see if these feelings I'm developing might be mutual. The truth is that for the first time in 9 years of drifting, I have found a place that feels like it could be home." Nora's breath caught. She should step back, put professional distance between them. Instead, she found herself leaning slightly into his touch. "I'm scared," she admitted. "I built this life for myself, this independence. I'm scared of changing it. I'm not asking you to change anything. I'm asking to be part of it if you will have me." She looked up at him, at the earnest hope in his face, and made a decision that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. "Stay," she said. "Work here, learn, see how it goes. But Samuel, if this does not work out, then I will leave, no hard feelings. But I think it will work out, Nora. I truly do." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it on his lips sent warmth flooding through her. She smiled, and his answering smile was like sunrise. The rain continued to fall, soft and steady, as they stood together in the clinic that was becoming something more than either of them had expected. A place where a drifting cowboy might find home, and where a solitary nurse might discover she did not want to be alone anymore. Over the following days, they settled into a new pattern. Samuel's official status shifted from patient to assistant, though Nora still checked his wound daily and reminded him not to overexert himself. He threw himself into learning with the same intensity he brought to everything else, asking questions, reading her medical texts, practicing bandaging techniques on rolled cloth, until he could wrap a wound nearly as neatly as she could. The rain gave way to clear skies, and news spread through Circleville that the nurse had taken on a helper. The reaction was mixed. Some of the older women in town pursed their lips and made pointed comments about propriety. Others, particularly those with medical experience with Nora, were more accepting. "About time you had help," Mrs. Henderson declared when Nora came to check on her rheumatism. You work yourself to the bone, girl, and that young man seems respectful enough. Mr. Chen at the general store was more cautious. People will talk, he warned. You have built a good reputation here. Do not let it be damaged. I am running a medical clinic, not a brothel, Nora replied sharply. Samuel is my assistant. There is nothing improper about a nurse having help. But she knew it was more complicated than that. She knew it because of the way her pulse quickened when Samuel smiled at her. Because of how they had begun to find excuses to stand close together while working. Because of the long conversations that stretched late into the evening, their voices low and intimate in the lamplight. On the 10th day, Nora removed Samuel's stitches. His shoulder had healed cleanly, leaving only a pinkish scar that would fade with time. You have recovered remarkably well, she said, dabbing the area with antiseptic one final time. You could ride out tomorrow if you wanted. But I am not going to, Samuel said. We had an agreement. We did. She stepped back, professionally distant now that the procedure was complete. You should still avoid heavy lifting for another week, but you can resume most normal activities. What about this? He reached out and gently took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. Nora's breath caught. Samuel. I know we agreed to see how working together goes. But Nora, I need you to know. My feelings, they are not going away. If anything, they are getting stronger. Mine too, she whispered because she could not deny it anymore. But I am scared. What if we ruin what we have? What if we make it even better? He lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles with such tenderness that her eyes stung with unexpected tears. When had anyone last touched her with such care? When had she last allowed anyone close enough to try? We should go slowly, she managed. As slow as you need. But slowly proved difficult when every shared task became charged with awareness. When washing dishes together meant their shoulders brushing, sending electricity through her body. When studying medical texts meant sitting side by side, close enough to share breath. When saying goodnight meant lingering in doorways, neither wanting to part. 2 weeks after Samuel's stitches came out, a family 10 miles south sent for Nora urgently. Their youngest daughter had fallen ill with a high fever. Nora prepared to go immediately, but Samuel stopped her. Let me come with you. What if you need help lifting her, or if the father is too distraught to assist? She started to argue, then realized he was right. Having an extra pair of hands could be invaluable. They rode out together as the sun was setting, Nora leading the way over trails she knew by heart. The sick girl was 6 years old, her fever dangerously high, her breathing rapid and shallow. Nora examined her carefully while Samuel helped calm the frantic mother. It's pneumonia, Nora announced grimly. We need to bring the fever down and keep her breathing. This is going to be a long night. It was. They worked together through the dark hours, Nora directing while Samuel followed her instructions precisely. Cool cloths for the fever, steam inhalations to help her breathe, careful monitoring of her pulse and temperature. The girl's mother hovered anxiously while her father paced. Just before dawn, the fever broke. The girl's breathing eased, and she fell into a natural sleep rather than the fitful unconsciousness that had gripped her before. She's going to be all right, Nora told the exhausted parents. Keep her warm, give her fluids when she wakes, and send for me if the fever returns. But I think the worst has passed. The ride back to Circleville took place in the soft light of morning. Nora was exhausted, running on nothing but determination and the relief of a successful treatment. She swayed slightly in her saddle, and Samuel immediately moved his horse closer to hers. Are you all right? Just tired. It was a long night. Here. He reached over, his hand steadying her. We can stop and rest if you need to. I will be fine once we're home. Home. She had said it without thinking, but the word felt right. The clinic was home, and Samuel was part of that now. When they arrived back, Samuel insisted she rest while he cared for the horses and tidied up. Nora was too tired to argue. She collapsed onto her bed in the back room, which she had reclaimed once Samuel moved to a makeshift sleeping area in the clinic's main room, and fell instantly asleep. She woke hours later to find the afternoon sun streaming through the window and the smell of cooking food. She emerged from her room to find Samuel at the stove, preparing what looked like stew. "You're awake," he said, smiling. "Good, you needed the rest. What time is it?" "About 3. "You slept through lunch, but I figured you needed it more than you needed food." She sat at the table, watching him work. He moved comfortably in the space now, knowing where everything was kept, handling the domestic tasks with the same competence he brought to assisting with medical work. "Samuel," she said quietly, "thank you, for last night, for everything." He set down the spoon he was holding and came to sit across from her. "Nora, you do not need to thank me. This is exactly where I want to be, doing exactly what I want to be doing. It means more than you know. I have been alone for so long. I forgot what it was like to have someone to rely on. You do not have to be alone anymore, not unless you want to be." "I do not want to be." The words hung between them, weighted with meaning. Samuel reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "Then let me stay, not just as your assistant. Let me court you properly, Nora. Let me prove that I am serious about this, about you. The town will definitely talk if we're courting. Then we will give them something worth talking about." She laughed despite herself. "You're very confident." "I'm very sure. There's a difference." His expression grew serious. "I have spent 9 years drifting because I never found anything worth staying for. But you, this work, this life you have built, it's worth staying for. You're worth staying for." Nora felt tears prick her eyes again. "I don't know how to do this. I have avoided romance for so long. We will figure it out together. That's what courting is, isn't it? Learning each other, seeing if we fit. I think we already know we fit. Then we will court anyway because you deserve to be wooed properly. And because I want everyone in this town to know that I am serious about my intentions toward you." His intentions. The old-fashioned phrase made her smile. "All right then. Court me, Samuel Quinn. But I am warning you, I am set in my ways and not easy to live with. I am stubborn as a mule and not much for fancy words. I think we will manage." They sealed the agreement with their hands clasped across the table. And when Samuel leaned forward to kiss her forehead gently, Nora closed her eyes and let herself feel the happiness flooding through her. The courting, when it began in earnest, was unlike anything Nora had experienced back east. There were no fancy dinner parties or theater outings, no elaborate bouquets or perfumed notes. Instead, Samuel courted her with his presence and his partnership. He brought her wildflowers from the hills, simple blooms of Indian paintbrush and lupine that he arranged in a jar on her work table. He insisted on accompanying her on long rides to distant patients, his presence making the lonely trails feel less isolating. He learned to assist with increasingly complex medical procedures, his steady hands and quick mind making him genuinely valuable as a medical assistant. And he talked to her. Long conversations about everything, sharing pieces of his past and listening to hers. She learned that he loved the night sky and could name most of the constellations, that his father had been a hard man but fair, teaching Samuel the value of honest work, that he had once wanted to be a teacher but lacked the education for it. "You could still learn," she told him one evening as they sat outside the clinic, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. "I could teach you. I have books and you're already a quick study. Why would you do that? Because you have a good mind that deserves development. Because I like teaching and you like learning. Because we're partners now and partners help each other grow." He turned to look at her, the setting sun gilding his profile. "Partners, I like the sound of that. So do I." 3 months after Samuel first arrived with a bullet wound in his shoulder, the whole town knew that the nurse and her assistant were courting. The scandal had mostly died down, replaced by a grudging acceptance. Samuel had proven himself helpful and respectful, assisting not just with medical work, but pitching in wherever he was needed around town. He helped repair the Johnsons' barn roof, tracked down a lost child who had wandered from home and could often be found at the general store, helping Mr. Chen lift heavy supplies. "That young man of yours is all right," Mr. Chen told Nora one afternoon. "Works hard, keeps his word." "You could do worse." "He's not my young man," Nora protested automatically, then stopped. "Well, I suppose he is." Mr. Chen's weathered face creased into a smile. "About time you admitted it. Whole town has been waiting for you two to make it official." The making it official happened on a cool evening in October. Samuel had been with Nora for 5 months, and they had fallen into a rhythm that felt as natural as breathing. They worked together, ate together, spent their evenings in comfortable companionship. But they had been careful, maintaining separate sleeping areas and keeping their physical affection limited to held hands and chaste kisses. That evening, Samuel asked Nora to take a walk with him. They climbed the hill behind the clinic, where the view opened up to show the whole valley spread below them, the town lights just beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk. "I need to tell you something," Samuel said, taking both her hands in his. "These past months with you have been the happiest of my life. Every morning I wake up grateful that a bullet wound brought me to your door. And I know we have been taking things slow, being careful, but Nora, I do not want to be careful anymore." Her heart began to pound. "What do you want?" "I want to marry you. I want to be your husband, not just your assistant. I want to wake up beside you every morning and fall asleep next to you every night. I want to build a life with you, a real life, permanent and lasting." He squeezed her hands gently. "I know I am not much. Just a drifting cowboy with no money and no prospects beyond what you have given me. But I love you, Nora Adams, and I will spend the rest of my life proving that you made the right choice if you say yes." Tears spilled down Nora's cheeks. "You're wrong about one thing." His face fell. "What?" "You're not just a drifting cowboy anymore. You're a skilled medical assistant, a valued member of this community, and the man I love. You're everything to me, Samuel." Hope blazed in his eyes. "Is that a yes?" "That is a yes. I will marry you." He let out a whoop of joy that echoed across the valley, then swept her into his arms, spinning her around as she laughed through her tears. When he set her down, he kissed her properly for the first time, not the careful pecks they had shared before, but a real kiss, full of passion and promise and love. "I do not have a ring," he said when they finally broke apart, both breathless. "I do not need one. You deserve one. You deserve everything. I have everything. I have you." They were married a month later in a simple ceremony at the clinic, with most of the town in attendance. Mrs. Henderson cried happy tears. Mr. Chen served as witness. The local minister, who rode a circuit between several small towns, performed the ceremony with his blessing, noting that he had never seen two people more clearly meant for each other. Nora wore a simple dress of pale blue that Mrs. Johnson had helped her sew. Samuel wore new clothes purchased with money he had saved from odd jobs around town. When he slipped the plain gold band onto her finger, purchased with every penny he had, Nora felt her heart overflow with happiness. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "You may kiss your bride." Samuel did, tenderly, while their friends and neighbors applauded. And when he whispered, "I love you, Mrs. Quinn," against her lips, Nora thought she might burst from the joy of it. The wedding celebration was simple but heartfelt, with food brought by neighbors and music played by old Tom Peterson on his fiddle. They danced together in the clinic that had brought them together, Samuel's arm around Nora's waist, both of them grinning like children. "Happy?" he asked as they swayed to the music. "Happier than I knew I could be." "Good. That's how I want you to feel every day for the rest of our lives." When the celebration ended and the last guests departed, Samuel and Nora were finally alone in the clinic that was now truly their home. They had rearranged things for the marriage, converting the back room into a proper bedroom for both of them, and setting up a new sleeping area for patients who needed overnight care. Samuel carried her over the threshold of their bedroom, both of them laughing at the tradition. "I know it is silly," he said, setting her gently on her feet. "It is not silly, it is sweet." They stood there for a moment, suddenly shy despite everything they had shared. Then Nora reached up to touch his face and Samuel covered her hand with his. "Are you nervous?" he asked softly. "A little, are you? Terrified. I want to make this perfect for you. It will be perfect because it's us," she smiled. "We have always been good at figuring things out together." And they were. The awkwardness faded quickly, replaced by tenderness and discovery and love. Samuel was gentle and patient, attentive to her needs and responses. And Nora, who had guarded her heart for so long, finally let all her walls fall away. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the bed, Samuel's good arm around her, Nora's head on his chest listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too. Have since the moment you told me to sit down before I fell down." That was the moment, maybe even before, maybe the moment you caught me when I collapsed against your door. His hand stroked her hair gently. "I think part of me knew right then that you were going to change my life. You changed mine too. I thought I was happy alone, but I was just comfortable. There's a difference. And now I am truly happy. Uncomfortable sometimes because love is unpredictable and scary, but happy in a way I never was before." They drifted off to sleep like that, wrapped around each other, two people who had each been alone finding completeness together. The years that followed were full and rich. Samuel continued to work as Nora's medical assistant, his skills growing until he could handle many routine procedures on his own. He never became a doctor in the formal sense, lacking the credentials and training, but he became something just as valuable. A trusted medical practitioner, someone the townspeople relied on when Nora was unavailable or when two patients needed attention simultaneously. They expanded the clinic, adding another room for patient care. Samuel built the addition himself, his cowboy skills translating well to carpentry. The town helped, grateful for the medical care the Quinns provided. 2 years into their marriage, Nora realized she was pregnant. She told Samuel one evening over dinner, simply stating the fact and watching his reaction. His fork clattered onto his plate. "Pregnant, you are sure?" "I am a nurse, Samuel. I know the signs. We are going to have a baby." Wonder spread across his face. "A baby. Are you happy?" "Happy, Nora, I am." He stood abruptly, came around the table, and pulled her into his arms. "I am more than happy. I am ecstatic and terrified and overwhelmed and so grateful I cannot even put it into words. I am scared," she admitted. "I have delivered dozens of babies but never carried one myself. I know, but we will get through it together, just like everything else." The pregnancy progressed normally, though Nora found it frustrating to be the patient rather than the practitioner. Samuel fussed over her constantly, insisting she rest more and work less. They argued about it frequently. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she told him after he tried to prevent her from riding out to see a patient. "I know, but I cannot help worrying. I am young and healthy. Women have babies all the time. You are my wife. You are having my baby. I am allowed to worry." She softened at that, reaching up to cup his face. "I am lucky to have you. We are lucky to have each other." Their son was born on a spring morning in 1881 after a labor that Nora found considerably more challenging from the patient's perspective. Samuel stayed with her throughout, holding her hand, encouraging her, completely unconcerned with propriety or tradition that said fathers should wait outside. One more push, the midwife they had brought in from Salt Lake City encouraged. "I can see the head." Nora pushed with everything she had, and suddenly there was a baby crying, loud and healthy and perfect. "It's a boy," the midwife announced, placing the squirming infant on Nora's chest. Samuel's face was wet with tears as he looked at his son. "He's perfect. Nora, he is perfect." "He is," she agreed, exhausted and exhilarated and overwhelmed with love for this tiny person they had created. They named him James after Samuel's father. Little James Quinn had his father's gray eyes and his mother's determined chin. He was healthy and loud and kept them awake for most of his first year. "I delivered babies," Nora said one night, walking the floor with the crying infant while Samuel heated milk. "I thought I understood what parents went through. I understood nothing." "But you would not trade him for anything," Samuel said, testing the milk temperature on his wrist like she had taught him. "Not for the world." James grew into a bright, curious toddler who wanted to be part of everything his parents did. He was often found in the clinic, playing quietly while Nora or Samuel worked, learning medical terms before he could properly pronounce them. When James was 3, Nora became pregnant again. This time she was more confident, knowing what to expect. Their daughter arrived on a cold November evening in 1884, smaller than James had been but just as healthy. "What should we name her?" Samuel asked, holding the tiny bundle with practiced ease. "I was thinking Rose after my mother. Rose Quinn, I like it." Rose was quieter than her brother, more observant. Where James was all energy and questions, Rose would sit and watch, absorbing everything. By the time she was 2, she could identify most of the common medical supplies in the clinic. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The clinic thrived, serving not just Circleville but several surrounding communities. Samuel became known as Dr. Quinn despite his lack of formal credentials, and he and Nora were respected members of the community. The children grew. James showed an interest in medicine like his parents, often assisting with simple tasks, even as a young boy. Rose turned out to have a gift for music, her fingers finding melodies on the old piano Samuel had surprised Nora with on their 5th anniversary. The years brought challenges too. There were patients they could not save, illnesses that defeated their best efforts. There were droughts that made life hard for everyone. There were times when money was tight and the future uncertain, but through it all, Samuel and Nora faced everything together. The drifting cowboy who had stumbled to her door with a bullet wound had found his home. The solitary nurse who thought she needed no one had discovered the joy of partnership. And together, they had built something lasting. 20 years after their wedding, Nora and Samuel sat on the porch of their expanded home, watching the sunset. James was away at medical school in Salt Lake City, fulfilling his dream of becoming a real doctor. Rose was inside practicing piano, the notes drifting through the open window. "Do you ever regret it?" Nora asked, her hand in Samuel's. "Giving up the drifting life? Not for a single moment. This is the life I was meant to have. I just had to get shot to find it. I should have charged you more for my services." He laughed, the sound as familiar and beloved as her own heartbeat. "You charged me everything. My freedom, my wandering heart, my solitary ways. And in return, you gave me everything that matters. A home, a family, a purpose, and a love deeper than I knew existed." She leaned against his shoulder, feeling the solidity of him, the permanence. "I am glad you took so long to recover." "What do you mean?" "From the bullet wound. I am glad you stayed longer than you needed to." Samuel pulled back to look at her, his gray eyes warm. "Nora Quinn, I have a confession to make." "Oh." "I was healed enough to leave after a week, maybe less." She stared at him. "What?" "The wound was not that serious and you were a very good nurse. But he smiled sheepishly. "I may have exaggerated my symptoms somewhat. Stayed very still when I should have been showing improvement. Generally gave the impression I was recovering more slowly than I actually was." "Samuel Quinn, you faked being injured," not faked, exaggerated. There is a difference. He caught her hands as she tried to pull away, laughing. I could not leave, Nora. I knew from the first few days that there was something special happening. I just needed time to prove it to you. She wanted to be angry, but she was laughing too. You are terrible. I am devoted. There is a difference. And if I had discovered your deception, then I would have left and regretted it for the rest of my life. But you did not discover it, and look how well things turned out. Nora shook her head, but she was smiling. 20 years. You kept that secret for 20 years. I figured enough time had passed that you could not be too angry. I should make you sleep in the barn. But you will not, because you love me. I do love you, even though you are a liar and a fake patient. And you are the most wonderful thing that ever happened to me. He kissed her gently. Thank you for catching me when I fell against your door. Thank you for tending my wounds and putting up with my tricks and loving me despite everything. Thank you for getting shot and stumbling to my clinic and being stubborn enough to stay. They sat together as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant colors. Inside, Rose's piano playing continued, a sweet melody that spoke of home and peace and love. Somewhere in Salt Lake City, their son studied medicine so he could return and help his parents serve the community. And on the porch, two people who had found each other against all odds held hands and watched the day end, secure in the knowledge that they had built something lasting. The years continued to pass gently. James returned from medical school in 1891, a fully qualified doctor eager to work alongside his parents. The clinic expanded again to accommodate 3 medical practitioners, becoming a true hospital that served communities from miles around. Rose met a young teacher who came to Circleville to start a school, a gentle man named Thomas Hart who loved her music and her quiet strength. They married when she was 22, and she continued to live nearby, her piano playing a frequent soundtrack to life at the Quinn household. Samuel's hair went silver at the temples, then fully gray. Nora found laugh lines around her eyes and discovered she did not mind them. They were marks of a life well lived, full of joy. On their 30th wedding anniversary, the whole town threw them a celebration. The barn at the Johnson Ranch was decorated with ribbons and flowers, tables groaning under the weight of food brought by grateful patients and their families. Speech, someone called, and Samuel reluctantly stood, pulling Nora up beside him. I am not much for speeches, he began, and the crowd laughed because this was well known. But I want to say this. 30 years ago, I was nobody, a drifting cowboy with no home and no purpose. Then I got shot, which seemed like terrible luck at the time. More laughter. But that bullet brought me to Nora's door, and she... He looked down at his wife, love shining in his eyes. She saved my life in more ways than just patching up a wound. She gave me a home, a family, a reason to be. Everything good in my life comes from the day she caught me before I hit the ground. Nora's eyes were wet. Should I give a speech too? Please do, someone called. She cleared her throat. Samuel says I saved his life, but the truth is we saved each other. I was alone by choice, thinking I did not need anyone. He showed me I was wrong. We built this life together, this clinic, this family, and I would not change a single moment of it. The applause was thunderous. James stood to toast his parents, speaking of the example they set. Rose played a song she had composed especially for the occasion, and Samuel and Nora danced together as they had on their wedding day, older and grayer but no less in love. 30 years, Nora murmured against his shoulder. How did we get so lucky? Skill and determination, Samuel replied. Plus a well-placed bullet and my willingness to pretend I was more injured than I was. She laughed, the sound rich and full of joy. I will never let you forget that. I would not want you to. 5 years later, James brought home a wife, a smart young woman named Catherine who had trained as a nurse in Salt Lake City. She and Nora became fast friends, working together in the clinic. And when the next generation of Quinns began to arrive, little ones who ran through the clinic playing doctor with their toy medical bags, Nora and Samuel became grandparents with all the joy that role entailed. They slowed down as the years passed. Samuel let James handle more of the physical work, though he still consulted on difficult cases. Nora trained Catherine to take over the more demanding aspects of nursing, though she remained actively involved. But they were always together, still holding hands when they walked, still sitting close in the evenings, reading or talking or simply being. Still very much in love. On a warm summer evening in 1908, Samuel and Nora sat on their porch as they had done countless times before. They were both in their 70s now, their children grown and settled, their grandchildren filling the world with noise and energy. "You remember the day we met?" Nora asked. "Every detail. You were wearing a gray dress with a white apron. Your hair was coming loose from its pins. And you caught me before I fell, even though I was much heavier than you. You remember what I was wearing. I remember everything about that day. It was the day my real life began." Nora squeezed his hand. "Mine too." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and gold, the same colors they had watched 38 years ago when Samuel proposed. The clinic stood solid and strong, still serving the community. Their family thrived. And they had each other, which was all they had ever needed. "I love you, Nora Quinn," Samuel said quietly. "I love you too, Samuel Quinn. Thank you for being stubborn enough to stay. Thank you for being kind enough to let me." The sun sank below the horizon. Inside the house, they could hear their grandchildren laughing, the sounds of family and home. And on the porch, two people who had found each other against all odds sat hand in hand, their love as steady and enduring as the mountains that ringed their valley home. 10 more years passed. Samuel and Nora slowed further, eventually retiring from active practice and letting James and Catherine run the clinic that had expanded into a proper hospital. But they remained involved, consulting on difficult cases, teaching the next generation. They moved at the same pace now, slower but together. Walking in the morning before the day grew hot. Sitting in the garden Samuel had planted years ago, watching things grow. Reading to each other in the evenings, taking turns with the books they both loved. Their children worried about them, but Samuel and Nora were content. They had lived full lives, made a difference in their community, raised good children, and loved each other deeply. What more could anyone ask? On a quiet autumn morning in 1918, exactly 40 years after they had met, Nora woke to find Samuel lying very still beside her. His hand was cold in hers. "Samuel," she whispered, though she already knew. He had passed in his sleep peacefully, his face calm and free of pain. He was 83 years old. The grief was crushing, but underneath it lay gratitude. They had been given 40 years together, 40 years of partnership and love and shared purpose. He had lived a long life, a good life, and had died peacefully in the home they built together. James tried to convince Nora to come live with him and Catherine after Samuel's death, but she refused. "This is my home," she told him gently. "Your father is buried here. My work is here. I am not leaving." She lived 4 more years, still sharp-minded and active despite her advancing age. She continued to see patients when needed, particularly the elderly ones who remembered when she had first arrived in Circleville and who trusted no one else. On a spring morning in 1922, Nora Adams Quinn passed away in her sleep, just as Samuel had. She was 87 years old. They found her with a smile on her face, her hand stretched across the bed as if reaching for someone who was no longer there. She was buried beside Samuel on the hill behind the clinic, the same hill where he had proposed so many years ago. The whole town came to the funeral. James spoke of his parents' love and dedication. Rose played the piano, And afterward, people shared stories of the lives Nora and Samuel had touched, the patients they had saved, the difference they had made. The clinic continued, run by James and eventually his children. The Quinn name became synonymous with medical care in that part of Utah, a legacy that stretched across generations. And on the hill where two headstones stood side by side, wildflowers grew every spring, Indian paintbrush and lupine, the same flowers Samuel had once picked for Nora when he was courting her. The story of the frontier nurse and the cowboy became part of local legend. How she had saved his life, and he had pretended to recover slowly so he could stay. How they had fallen in love and built something lasting. How their devotion to each other and their community had created a legacy that endured long after they were gone. In the end, theirs was a simple story. Two people finding each other in an unlikely place, building a life together through determination and love. But simple stories are often the best ones, the truest ones, the ones that remind us what really matters in life. Samuel Quinn had been a drifting cowboy with nowhere to call home. Nora Adams had been a solitary nurse who thought she needed no one. Together, they became partners, spouses, parents, healers, and pillars of their community. Together, they proved that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places, and that love, when it is real and deep and true, can overcome anything. Their story ended, as all stories must, but the love they shared and the life they built continued on in their children and grandchildren, in the hospital that bore their name, in the memories of a community they served, and in the wildflowers that bloomed every spring on a hill overlooking Circleville, Utah, where a nurse once caught a falling cowboy and changed both their lives forever.